Thanks, Nicole. I didn't realize you were from Alfred. That's great. Everyone can hear me, I'm hoping.
Yes.
Okay. So, hi everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Ellen Bahr, and I'm going to be presenting today with my colleague Kevin Adams. The work we're presenting was a collaborative project between us and two other librarians here at Alfred, Samantha Dannick, who's here with us and keeping an eye on the chat, and John Hosford, who wasn't able to join us. So our presentation is going to focus on a case study from last spring when we introduced some students and faculty to an artificial intelligence-powered search tool called Keenious. But before we do that, we'd like to hear from all of you. So we're going to ask you to, in the chat, put a word or a couple of words or an emoji that expresses how you're feeling about artificial intelligence and library instruction. All right, I'm watching some of the comments come through here. Reluctant, oh, already tired of it, complicated, hesitant, excited, that's great. Um, Overwhelmed by the amount of information about it. So a real range of feelings about AI and library instruction. And I'll just say that I think that this is very reflective of how we felt at Alfred University diving into this realm. I think based on the project we did last spring, we're feeling a little bit better about it, but of course we're also learning as well. Okay, so to give you a sense of where we're going with the presentation, first we're going to explain what Keenious is and how it works, just to give you some context to what we're talking about. Then we're going to share what we're calling a tool-based approach to introducing students to AI. We'll share the process that we followed for gathering feedback from students and faculty and how it informed our decision ultimately to subscribe to Keenious. And finally, we'll invite you to consider how you might be able to use a similar approach in introducing and evaluating new AI tools at your institutions. So first, just a bit about Keenious. Some of you may have heard of it. We aren't going to go too in depth today because we really want to keep the focus on information literacy and how you might introduce a tool like Keenious to your students. But we do want to give you some context so you have a general idea of how it works. So it's a relatively new search tool that uses artificial intelligence to recommend articles based on text that the user provides. So the text can be something short, like an outline or a paragraph, or it could be an entire academic paper or dissertation. Keenious' recommendations, the articles that it recommends, are drawn from an interdisciplinary index called OpenAlex that has over 200 million scholarly works in it. So let's talk a little bit about how Keenious is different from a typical library database. This is something that we discussed with students that we met with because we thought it was important to kind of demystify the technology and give them some insights into how it actually works. So first, Keenious looks for shared terms between the text that you provide and the texts of articles that it recommends. So in this way, it isn't unlike like traditional library databases because it's looking for matches of those words, but the difference is that it can use a much longer text to search on. Unlike traditional databases, Keenious also focuses on rare terms in the text that you provide and looks for matches in the titles and abstracts of the articles it recommends. So this is rather different. Keenious also uses a language model to predict the meaning of the text that you provide and then looks for articles with similar meaning. So this is, kind of the AI part of Keenious and perhaps an example of the direction in which search is moving away from keyword searching and more towards prompts and analyzing larger texts. So the overall process for using Keenious is pretty straightforward. The user provides Keenious with some text, so it can be a PDF file, it can be a URL for the document, or you can simply copy and paste text into Keenious. Keenious then presents you with a list of recommended articles that you can review. There is the option to bookmark articles as long as you're logged into Keenious. And Keenious also uses OpenURL to link users to full text. So our users can link to Alfred University full text. And if we don't have full text, they can access the interlibrary loan or resource sharing request options. There are also Microsoft Word and Google Docs add-ins or extensions so that you can use Keenious from right within those word processing applications. So just to give you a sense of what it looks like, this is a screenshot of the Keenious search interface. So in the center, you can see the text that was provided. This is just the first paragraph of an article. On the right-hand side, you see a list of recommended articles. These are articles that Keenious is recommending. And then there are a variety of ways to narrow down the search. For example, with the filters up here, you can filter by publication date, citation count, or open access status. And then Keenious also makes use of something that it calls topics. These are kind of broad subject areas that you can include or exclude from your search. And Keenious also prioritizes more recent and highly cited articles. So one kind of interesting feature of Keenious is that it provides insights into how certain factors affect the ranking of the articles that it recommends. So this is the kind of thing that can help students to understand kind of what's behind the ranking, what's under the hood, and how this tool is working. So in this particular example, the text that was provided had an 82% influence on the results, and the AI predicted meaning of the text provided had an 18% influence. It's a little weird that they call it keywords here. It's really the full text that we're talking about that was provided. The article was given a 0.9% boost for recency. This is a 2006 article, and it was given a 3.6% boost for the citation count. And this article had 11 citations. Okay, so now let's go into what we did last spring semester. So our Dean of Libraries set up a trial subscription to this product called Keenious. He was interested in having access to an AI-powered tool so we could get some experience with it and try it out. So the librarians started, playing with it, and we found it pretty interesting, but we weren't sure how useful it would really be to our students. And, I think we were also feeling some trepidation about wading into this whole AI realm, maybe also because we hadn't had a lot of conversations here on campus as a faculty about AI, and we didn't really know how faculty would feel about our introducing an AI tool to their students. We were also concerned about how Keenious handled privacy issues and wanted to learn more about that, and we'll say a bit more of that a little bit later in the presentation. So in the end, a small group of us, as I said, me, Kevin, John, and Sam, decided to see if we could find some faculty who would let us into their classroom to introduce Keenious to students, talk with them about it, get some feedback, both about Keenious and about AI in general. So we were able to find a pretty good handful of faculty who were interested. And so this is a list of the classrooms or the classes that we visited. We had a pretty wide range of subjects, including engineering, communications, history, psychology, and art. Some of these classes were undergraduate, some were graduate, including students working on theses or dissertations. And then we took a pretty collaborative approach to developing the instruction materials. So we met and identified some overall goals that we thought we could focus on for the classes that we did. We shared PowerPoint slides with each other. But we also gave each other the flexibility to adapt things as needed. So depending on the subject or maybe the level of the class. And also when it came to things like examples that we used in class of AI and how we talked about it, so that we could draw on our own experience and really focus on the things that we felt most knowledgeable about or comfortable with. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for the second part of the presentation.
Thanks, Ellen. So in our lesson plan, we included a brief introduction to AI and a discussion of some ethical considerations. We were excited to teach students about the tool, but we also wanted them to be critical of the tool and AI in general. So we focused on real-world examples of AI that the students would be familiar with, including things like algorithms that they've encountered on services like Spotify or Netflix, TikTok. We talked about ChatGPT, which most students are familiar with, if not using at this point, and technologies like self-driving cars or facial recognition technology. As part of the conversation, we touched on some ethical considerations with AI, including the potential for bias, especially in generative AI, and the environmental impact of these large new technologies and their servers and kind of the physical and environmental ramifications. We incorporated an activity to demonstrate how generative AI works. So actually, if you all would like to follow along with this activity, what we did was we asked our students to take out their phones and open up a texting app, and then just type in one word. And then from there, start pressing the suggested word, say the middle suggested word about 15 times. In this example, you can see, maybe it comes out making some sense, maybe it comes out relatively gibberish. But the point is that the predictive text is based on kind of what the app knows about you and what kind of words make sense according to it and its like programmed sense of the English language. We use this exercise as a jumping off point to talk about how large language models and generative AI work, kind of with a huge amount of data in comparison and a lot more rules and deep learning, et cetera. But it kind of serves as a starting access point for students. We then demonstrated Keenious and talked about how it's different from generative AI and traditional library databases and invited students and the faculty member to try it out. So we gathered feedback in a variety of formats. At the end of each instructional session, we dedicated some time to talking about their experiences with Keenious, and we also invited students to complete a short online survey, which we built using Microsoft Forms. A few weeks later, after the students and faculty had more time to use Keenious, we sent another survey via email to follow up and see how the data compared. On the next slide here, we have an example of kind of how we introduced this to students and faculty. They were able to use a QR code to access the Microsoft form. I don't think you all will be able to use this QR code because you won't have access to like our institutional login. But the slide is helpful because it kind of shows that we're giving some context to the students that they are getting a little bit of like agency and power and ability to contribute to the conversation about how we're spending our money and making our decisions within the library, which was really exciting for some of them. So we asked somewhat different questions of students and faculty, but there was also overlap. With students, we asked about the likelihood of using Keenious for academic work, and with faculty, we asked about the likelihood of using Keenious for teaching or research. We also asked faculty to share their thoughts about students using AI-powered tools in their academic work because we were wondering if they had any concerns about this, and some of them did. Not all of them. Well, some concerns. Some were stronger than others, I'll say. We received written feedback from 3 faculty members. In general, they appreciated the opportunity to talk about AI with students and the librarian, and they felt that both students and faculty needed more guidance on how to use AI effectively. They also said that they enjoyed learning about an AI tool designed specifically for research. Students' feedback varied quite a bit. So this may be because the students that we were working with included undergraduate students as well as advanced graduate students. Some students said that Keenious was easy to use, while others found it to be quite confusing. Many liked the idea of inputting text instead of keywords, and more advanced students, such as doctoral students, really appreciated the interdisciplinary nature of Keenious and found that it identified articles that they hadn't previously encountered. Some faculty shared this input as well. Quite a few students remarked that Keenious would be a good tool for topic exploration, and most students said that they would use Keenious alongside other library databases, using them for different purposes. So to summarize what we learned, many students and faculty were enthusiastic about Keenious, saying that they were likely to use it in their academic work. Most faculty were supportive of providing access to Keenious, although it's probably worth noting here that there may have been some selection bias because, of course, these were the faculty that responded positively to our initial invitation to show the tool to the class. Incorporating assessment that we received from faculty and students and during the instruction really helped us to gauge the interest in the tool. And due to the largely positive feedback, we did wind up recommending to subscribe to Keenious. And as Ellen mentioned earlier, one piece that we didn't really get to talk too much, we talked a little bit with students about, but ultimately we were kind of convinced on our end from our conversations with Keenious was that they had addressed privacy concerns adequately. Because they're based in Europe, they are subject to general data protection regulation laws. And so Keenious gathers and stores pretty minimal user-supplied data, while it does log things like device and location data. The text that the user provides for searching is encrypted, it's not shared, and any uploaded PDFs are not stored on Keenious' servers. And the user uploaded text is not actually used to train Keenious, which we found very reassuring. While we didn't build this into all of our lesson plans, this kind of came up in some conversations with students, which is kind of another pathway to talk about things like privacy literacy, especially with relationship to AI. So in summary, we'd like to propose to you this process that we followed as a potential model for introducing a tool and also talking about AI. We're calling it a tool-based approach or tool-based introduction to AI. We found that there were benefits in this approach, which I'll kind of summarize here. So first, it provided an opportunity for us to gain hands-on experience with the AI-powered tool. It also created a natural opportunity, or you could even say excuse, to talk to students and faculty about AI, something that we were finding difficult to do otherwise. It gave us each some motivation and a reason to learn more about AI so that we could talk about it with students and faculty. And it also created an opportunity for dialogue with faculty and students. In some cases, it disrupted our preconceived ideas about AI and its potential role in academic work. That isn't to say that we aren't skeptical of AI or that we've become some kind of AI evangelists, but we are beginning to see the potential value of AI to academic work. So I'll throw a link in the chat here in a moment, but I would like to invite you all to use this Keenious Padlet to kind of take an opportunity to ponder how you might use a tool-based approach to AI to encourage students to think critically about the academic uses of a tool like ChatGPT or Keenious or Primo AI Research Assistant. Here is a link. And then after we've kind of spent a little bit of time with the Padlet, see how folks are thinking about different questions that they might encourage students to ask while they're playing with a tool like this, we'll open things up for questions a little bit. So the kind of example that I had thrown in was on subject coverage because that's something that came up a lot in our conversation with students, is thinking about what the subject coverage looks like. It's kind of important to be able to find things that are related to your field, but also it was helpful for students to kind of discover articles about their topic from a different perspective. The example that comes to mind is a history professor was using the tool and plugged in a draft of a paper that she had about the history of police brutality and its effect on Black folks in the Rochester area. And she got a lot of articles about kind of medical research related to the effects of police brutality and the psychological effects as well. I was very excited to kind of be exposed to these articles in a perspective that she hadn't previously thought about. Some other things that are coming up here that I'm excited to see. So privacy. Obviously, we touched on that a tiny bit, but didn't kind of work that into our lesson plan. I think that would be great to encourage students to think about really critically. Citations and how to acknowledge use of different AI tools in your academic work is a very interesting and kind of ongoing conversation that I'm excited to see how it develops, but it would also be really interesting to kind of tap student ideas and see what they're thinking about with it. Where is the information coming from, and how is it getting it? How can you actually trace back to its sources? With something like Keenious that's meant to like show you to a tool, it's really helpful to be able to identify how it works. With something like ChatGPT that, sometimes successfully points you to a real resource and sometimes it doesn't. These are really important questions. I love this question about trust. I think it's kind of an interesting philosophical question for students to be grappling with of just like, what does it mean to trust an AI tool? How much do you trust it? Could lead to some really interesting classroom conversation. I like this one also about the consumer rights and understanding the end user agreement. I think that this would pair nicely with kind of reading a privacy policy as a group and trying to understand what it is that the tool is doing kind of underneath of it all, right? It provides a service, but like, what does it mean for you as a user, and what does it mean for kind of privacy as you're giving things to this tool that it's able to use? I'm starting to see folks responding in here, so please feel free to respond to each other as well. And Sam and Ellen, please jump in if you have thoughts. I like this question about time. I think that it's easy for students to be excited about new technology, and kind of thinking about if the tool is actually going to be more efficient or if it's just something new and feels exciting to do it in a different way. How will it actually save you time? Not that that's necessarily always like the best thing, but it can be really helpful. I like this question about kind of comparing it to a database search as well. It's something that we were really thinking about with Keenious because there's some overlap, right, in the way that it works using keywords, but it ultimately functions very differently from a user perspective, which I think was really interesting.
Kevin and Sam, maybe we could turn to looking at some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm
Okay.
sorry if I didn't touch on anything that you've contributed. As things come in, things are kind of bopping around and I'm losing track, but I'm really enjoying reading the responses here. So thank you for contributing. And please feel free to continue adding things and interacting with other folks' posts.
So maybe I'll read out some questions and Kevin and Sam, you can help me to answer them. Jocelyn asks, what did students find most confusing about the tool? I think maybe generally our undergrads found it more confusing than the grad students. Um, I'm not sure why, maybe just because of the volume of citations that it presents, and the lack of familiarity with the interface, perhaps. I'm not really sure. I met mostly with graduate students and they kind of took to it right away. So maybe Kevin or Sam, if you met with undergrads, you might have something to say about that.
Yeah, I think it was like trying to figure out how to filter and access results was kind of where students were having the most difficulty. Um, Ultimately, if they were able to articulate their question, we were able to work through it together in class. But I think that some students were less receptive to kind of hearing the answer to some of their questions and were more kind of wrapped up in playing with the tool. And if they couldn't figure it out themselves, then they left with some of those questions, whether or not they had been kind of addressed in the conversation that ensued. classic, like give students a handout and they stop listening to what you're saying because they're looking at the handout kind of situation.
Yeah, I had some students, ironically, we had trained them well enough about how to interact with library databases that they were, just trying to put in like a couple of keywords. And Keenious generally is better with you need like a critical mass of text. So they were putting in just a couple of words and then not really getting good results. They were also kind of thrown by the number of results that they would get, especially kind of pre-filtering. And the interdisciplinary nature. So like some of the students were like, none of this stuff is relevant. Also for some of the engineering students that were dealing with some really hyper specific subject matter, they didn't always get great results from that. But I think mostly it was just that it was a very different user interface than anything that they had really used before at that point.
Now we have a question from Yuki. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. What is the difference between Keenious and Perplexity? Both of them are advertised as AI search engines. I'm not super familiar with Perplexity, but I think it may be a generative AI search engine. Kevin or Sam, do you?
I'm not sure. I haven't used Perplexity either.
Yeah, I
Okay.
haven't spent a ton of time with it, but as far as I know, it's kind of one of those where it'll generate an answer. Its advantages over, say, like ChatGPT, which I think is what it's built on, is that it will include citations. Most importantly, maybe not most importantly in terms of results, but I think there's a pretty big gap in kind of the privacy realm and the business model. Between like Keenious and Perplexity, that would be potentially a consideration. Perplexity is a San Francisco-based kind of startup type thing. I think they are integrating ads and like shopping at this point. So not necessarily purely academic. But in terms of kind of how it would work for users who don't necessarily care about those sorts of things, I don't think I can answer super well at this point.
And I'm just thinking that, part of the positive response we got from the faculty we talked with, even though it was a small number, might be because Keenious is not generative AI. It doesn't generate information on its own. It really just presents sources that you can then use in your work. So I think that does have something to do with the positive response. Let me come down a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, Abby says probably because undergrads are still coming to terms with what research actually is. Yeah, that's, it was maybe a big leap for them to be also using this brand new tool. A comment, most of the students using AI that I've worked with do not find it very helpful with their research questions. However, they do find it useful for inspiration. Yeah, and I think that's true with Keenious as well, that it's a great tool for exploring topics because you can look at it from a lot of different angles and it's interdisciplinary, which is what the psychology grad students that I met with really loved about it. So instead of a subject specific database, they are, able to look at their topic from a lot of different angles. Let's see, Yvonne is asking, I'm curious to know whether you have used the Alma-based research assistant, and if so, how it compares to Keenious. Yeah, we're starting to look at it, and I think that's going to be the next thing for us to tackle. And I've thought a little bit about, not just I, but we have thought about how we might be able to kind of use the same approach that we used with that tool, perhaps as a way to introduce it, begin to get comfortable with it, think about how to teach it, and get feedback as well. But that is generative AI, so it's a different kind of story.
Yeah, and we will be kind of hopefully drafting some similar questions to what you all have shared in the Padlet for folks to start thinking critically about Primo Research Assistant. It's tricky because, yeah, folks have more negative reactions to it than Keenious from the people that I've talked to so far. And we want to be careful with kind of our faculty relationships and introducing new tools like this. But I think it'll be an interesting way to open up some critical conversations about how to use the tool.
I was just going to add, in response to Samantha's comments, in response to Emily's question, yeah, the Keenious is strong in the sciences and the STEM data for the most part, and it there's less content as you move down to social sciences and then the humanities. So it is something to be aware of with the content in Keenious.
Yeah, and it's all based off of OpenAlex, so you can kind of look at the breakdown. I think Keenious on their website might actually have a breakdown also, kind of like topic coverage as well, if you're interested in checking that out. I think we got all the questions, and I think that brings us to 2:10. Is that our time for today?
I think so.
Okay,
That's it.
awesome.
That seems like perfect timing. So thank you all for your presentation, and thanks everyone for participating. And we'll have our next presentation at 2:20. So we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.